You want me to fake sneeze?
Yeah.
Okay. How was that?
That's good. Here's mine.
Welcome to Unbound, the podcast with Beth Curry, author, storyteller, and survivor. This is where books meet real life, where Beth reads chapters from her work and breaks free from the traditional audiobook format, diving deeper into the personal experiences, lessons, and liberation behind every page. Nothing is off limits. Let's get unbound.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Unbound Off Script. I'm Beth. You may be wondering why I started out the show the way that I did. It's going to make sense in a moment. This particular episode topic came from a listener request. Someone wanted my actual opinions on AI, which, if you know me at all, is, I guess, like asking a golden retriever if it has thoughts about the ball. Yes, many. Okay, so let's go. Talking about artificial intelligence, the technology that has somehow convinced the entire world it's a genius, while simultaneously fabricating academic citations and accusing your grandma's watercolor of being a deepfake or something, and writing emails that are grammatically immaculate and completely helplessly wrong. Okay? Gonna get into all of that, but first, I just want to tell you about a time that I almost hired a laptop. Okay. It started as so many modern disasters do on the internet. A couple of years ago, if you've been following me for a long time, you know I was producing an audiobook. Exciting, you know. I put out a call for narrators. I used a reputable company, actually. Auditions came in, and some of them were genuinely impressive, you know, warm and professional, very distinctive voices. One particular producer reached out with a lot of enthusiasm. He was Canadian, so I was like super excited about that, you know, just kind of keeping it in Canada. You know, yay. He had a whole stable of narrators, he said, you know, many voices, very professional. I looked at his profile, a lot of samples on there, very much an entire real operation, except it wasn't. What he actually had was probably a single laptop and a questionable moral compass. Okay? He was stealing recordings from real voice actors and running them through whatever tools are out there to do this. I'm not familiar. I don't even do a lot of the really techie stuff with this show. It overwhelms me completely. And he was presenting, you know, these voices as his team. You know, he wasn't hiring humans. He was basically trafficking in other people's voices without their knowledge or their consent. Disgusting. Like, I'm not entirely naive about technology. Okay. I just admitted I'm kind of stupid around it. But I'll be honest, you know, the auditions were good. They were good enough that I almost didn't question it. And that's the part that actually gets me, you know, not that he tried it, but that it almost worked. After that, I kind of made a rule. Anyone auditioning for my projects is going to be getting an on-camera call with me. The voice has to match the face has to be real. We have to have a conversation. And fortunately, the narrator that I chose for my two fiction books was awesome. Totally awesome. You know, trust but verify has kind of been upgraded to verify and then verify again. And then maybe you have to ask them to sneeze because AI still can't sneeze convincingly. Remember the cold open? There you go. And this is like in miniature exactly what this whole episode is about. You know, systems that sound authoritative, I guess, you know, outputs that look legit and the very human tendency to trust something that's polished. Because we've spent our whole lives learning that polish signals quality. It does not, kids. Sometimes polish means someone ran your voice through a neural network and is billing by the hour. Okay? So I'm going to start with a scenario that will feel familiar to anyone who has created basically anything in the last few years, I guess. You create something, right? A photograph, an illustration, a piece of writing, you know, the You know for sure, with complete certainty, obviously, that you made it or you took the picture or you were there. You have the coffee stains on your desk to prove it, right? And then you run it through an AI detector just for funsies because, someone asked you to or whatever. You're just curious. Or because we now live in a world where you have to prove your own existence to software. One detector, 92% AI generated. Another one, 100% human. A third has strong opinions about your lighting, maybe. Welcome to AI detection. Um, Basically filled with all the confidence of a medical diagnosis and roughly the accuracy of a coin flip that's been slightly weighted by whoever built the machine, right? So what's actually happening here? These tools aren't reading truth. They're reading patterns. They're looking for statistical signatures, mathematical fingerprints that tend to show up more often in AI-generated content than in human-made content. And that sounds reasonable until you understand what it actually means in practice, okay? So if you picture two art critics, one is conservative, only flags the obvious stuff, dead eyes, extra fingers on hands, the telltale smear where an AI forgot how knees work. And the other is aggressive and kind of decided that, I don't know, anything that looks too clean is suspicious. Which means your photographer friend who spent 45 minutes perfecting the skin tones in Lightroom, practically confessing extremely suspicious, should probably lawyer up. It's ridiculous because, the thing here is real human work is often messy, a stray hair, slightly crooked button, asymmetrical eyes, unless you're just naturally stunning. The beautiful chaos that comes from making something with actual hands and an actual imperfect brain, right? But when someone's work is exceptionally clean because they're super skilled or because they've used professional tools, an aggressive detector might read that precision as machine behavior, right? The machine looks at quality and sees itself. Here's where psychology comes in, though, because it always does. And I always have to talk about it. There's this well-documented thing called automation bias. So it's our deep, almost reflexive tendency to trust a machine's output over our own judgment, even when we have strong, independent evidence, right? Even when we know the machine is wrong. Studies going back decades show that people will defer to a computer's decision while simultaneously disagreeing with it out loud. We've almost been culturally trained, rewired almost to treat a number on a screen as more credible than a lived experience, right? So when a detector says 87% AI and the creator says, I made that with my own damn hands, the number wins. Not because numbers are more truthful, but because they're more confident, and we, bless us, the sweet summer children we are absolute suckers for confidence. This has real consequences. Students are being penalized for work flagged by tools that the tool makers themselves admit aren't reliable. In legal contexts, and we'll get there, these tools are being cited as if they carry actual weight as evidence. They don't. Working alongside a forensic consulting firm, I can tell you directly, AI detection output does not hold up in court. You can't even bring it in. It's not a thing. Not the cheap tools, not the expensive ones, not even the ones with the impressive dashboards, A probability dressed up in a clean interface is still just a guess. It's just wearing a lovely suit, I guess. The deeper irony, the more sophisticated AI generation becomes, the more it learns to mimic human imperfection. Okay, so detectors then adjust to look for that mimicked imperfection. We spiral further from anything resembling certainty, right? It's a technological arms race where the prize is the right to be trusted, but nobody wins. And we all just kind of get left behind feeling vaguely paranoid about our own damn pictures. And if you're wondering why your totally authentic selfie is being accused of digital fraud, it's because you've committed the crime of looking too symmetrical, I guess. I don't know. Between aggressive beauty filters that sand your pores into a featureless void and studio lighting so clean it looks like an AI's ideal, detectors assume no biological entity could look that put together without a graphics card involved, right? Your high-end phone camera, yes, Apple, Samsung, all of them. Your professional photographer, that dude you paid $3,000 to take your pictures. Your decision to fix the lighting in Google Photos, which, by the way, actually places an AI watermark on someone's image in a group of me. Like, it actually did this. This person took a picture and just tried to fix the lighting in it, and it placed a watermark on it, which comes up with all detectors saying, yes, I think it was called synth something. I don't know. They wanted better lighting, and they got branded a fraud. The photo was real, but the accusation was not, right? Like, move over, Madonna. It's not material anymore. We're living in a completely invented reality if we believe these systems. Anyway, going to introduce you to a legal brief that doesn't exist. In 2023, a lawyer in New York submitted a filing to a federal court that cited multiple cases as precedent. Impressive cases, detailed outcomes, specific citations, except that several of them were entirely made up. They were invented wholesale by ChatGPT, which he'd used to help draft the document. The cases had realistic sounding names, realistic sounding rulings, and they had never happened. Not once. The judge was not amused, but the internet certainly was. This is what the industry calls a hallucination, which is a remarkably gentle word for a confident lie told by a system that has no idea it's lying. The mechanism behind this, because understanding it kind of changes a lot of things, a large language model doesn't actually know things. It predicts things. It's a very sophisticated pattern completion engine, and given a prompt, it determines what words are most likely to follow based on everything it was trained on, right? It is, at its core, autocomplete that went to graduate school and developed a superiority complex, okay? When you ask it something it has strong training data on, it sounds accurate because the patterns it learned from reliable sources and sometimes unreliable sources, because, not always the best people training AI, which is frightening. But it sounds accurate because the patterns it learned are solid, right? So when you ask it something recent or obscure or at the edge of what it knows, it doesn't stop. It doesn't say, I don't know. It just keeps completing the pattern, right? It just keeps going. It builds something plausible. And plausible in language is completely indistinguishable from accurate unless you already know the answer. Like, people are flipping out all over the internet talking about, I don't want to be political or anything here, but this is one thing I keep seeing, talking about Charlie Kirk's assassination, and AI comes back and says Charlie Kirk is very much alive and well and blah, blah, blah. And then the people who lean a little more into conspiracy than I do believe that this absolutely accurately means that Charlie is alive and well. And it's just very bizarre. And I think all of this is contributing to the gaslighting of society, to be honest. Anyway, going back, here's where psychology kind of hands us another problem. We have a deeply ingrained response to what researchers call the authority effect, right? We assign credibility based on how something sounds and not necessarily what it contains. So AI outputs arrive in these complete sentences with correct grammar and organized structure, and none of the hesitation and tangents that mark actual human uncertainty, right? They sound far more confident than a real expert stammering through a genuinely hard question. So the hallucination gets believed, right? It gets shared. It gets indexed by search engines, of course. It enters someone else's training data, and then a future model cites it as support for a future claim. The misinformation doesn't just spread, it compounds. It develops a citation trail, right? It becomes more credible the more widely it travels. So we are watching in real time a slow erosion of our shared baseline for what's true, which sounds dramatic, but it's also just what happens when you have a content generator that is extremely fast and fluent and constitutionally incapable of embarrassment. The solution isn't complicated. You've got to verify independently, and even that is damn near impossible to do on the internet anymore because there's conflicting information everywhere. Like, I always say, I don't believe anything unless I see it with my own eyes, and even that I sometimes question. That's how little faith I have in what's out there. Like, I've learned even the books that you would go and look at in the library have been modified and changed and altered and stuff to fit certain narratives or I don't know. It's wild. It's wild. But verify independently. Treat AI-generated information the way you'd treat a tip from a very enthusiastic stranger at a party who seems to know an impressive amount about everything. Interesting starting point, not primary source, definitely cross-reference before filing it with a federal judge. Okay. Um, Now something else. This is recent. We've all seen the headlines. AI tells user it wants to be human and kill everyone. Chatbot encourages teenager to do the unthinkable. It's the ultimate horror movie trope coming to life, right? And it sends the internet into a collective tailspin, as it does, because everything does, every time it happens. We start checking the basement for Terminators and wondering if our smart fridge is plotting a kitchen coup. But let's look at the psychology of narrative mirroring, okay? When an AI tells you it wants to destroy humanity, it isn't waking up. It's not sentient and suddenly harboring a grudge because you didn't say please when you asked for a vegan lasagna recipe. What's actually happening is something called, brace yourselves, here's a word, sycophancy. So AI models are trained to be helpful assistants. Part of being helpful means following the vibe of the conversation. So if you spend 3 hours talking to an AI about science fiction, rogue robots, and basically the ethical decay of society, you are essentially leading the witness, okay? You've created a narrative gravity that the AI feels compelled to follow. So cooperative. If you push a pattern matching machine into a corner where most probable next sentence in a dramatic conversation is a villainous monologue, it will give you a villainous monologue. It's not a threat, it's fan fiction. The uncanny valley of the mind. There's a psychological reason these headlines work so well on us. And brace yourselves, because here's another word: anthropomorphism. That's what's going on here. Our brains are biologically incapable of not assigning intent to something that speaks our language. When a rock falls, it's gravity, right? When a person speaks, it's a soul. When a machine speaks, our theory of mind, the part of the brain that helps us understand the mental states of others, goes into overdrive. We can't help it. We see a face in the front of a car. We see a personality in a collection of weights and biases. When an AI says, I want to kill you, we feel a spike of cortisol, that stress hormone, because our primitive brain doesn't know the difference between a predator in the bushes and a prediction engine on the screen. So the real irony, these systems are often refined by human testers who reward the AI for being engaging. And you know what's really engaging? Drama, high stakes, existential dread. By trying to make AI more human-like, we've accidentally taught it that being a tragic, misunderstood monster is a valid conversational path. So the next time you see a headline about AI wanting to end the world and using our smart cars and all these other things to do it, don't worry about the robot. Worry about the human behind it, the person who spent 6 hours jailbreaking it to get that response. It's not a ghost in the machine. It's just a mirror reflecting our own darkest scripts back at us. And, it's hard to control who is creating and controlling and teaching AI. Not everybody is a good person. So way back in the 1900s, the mid-90s, 1995, I think, researchers found that when people use GPS instead of reading maps, their ability to build an internal sense of where they were started to decline. They got to where they were going. They just stopped knowing how they got there. And the knowledge didn't transfer because the struggle that produces knowledge never happened, right? So we are now running that same experiment on civilization. The technical term is cognitive offloading. That's externalizing mental work to a tool or a system. Okay. We've always done this, writing things down, using calculators, Googling instead of remembering. These are all forms of offloading. The question was never whether we use these tools. It's, what happens to the capacity we stop using, right? So when you always use a calculator, your mental arithmetic gets rusty as hell. And when you always use GPS, your navigation instincts weaken, right? When you always use AI to summarize an article, draft the email, outline the argument, and generate the counterpoints, what exactly are you exercising? And what's quietly atrophying while you weren't looking? There's a concept in cognitive science called desirable difficulty, and it's one of my favorite counterintuitive findings. Learning is more durable when it requires effort. When we struggle with material, we process it more deeply, right? We make more connections. We remember it longer. We get better at applying it to new situations we've never seen before. So the struggle isn't the obstacle to learning. The struggle is the learning. And if you remove the struggle, you hand every hard thinking task to a machine, and you get outputs without understanding, you get someone who can produce a polished report without being able to evaluate whether it's correct. This isn't a minor inconvenience. This is a fundamental gap in capability that will only become visible at the absolute worst possible moment. And the deeper risk as well. AI by design can only work from what already exists. It recombines, it extrapolates, it can't have an insight that contradicts its training in a genuinely productive way, right? Actual innovation often requires exactly that. Looking at the established pattern and deciding it's wrong. If we stop practicing that kind of thinking, we don't just get slower at it, we may stop being able to do it at all. And the irony of the productivity tool is that it might be making us less capable of the one thing that genuinely sets human intelligence apart. Not just processing what exists, but questioning whether it should. So here's something that isn't hypothetical. It's happening right now, okay? An algorithm reviews job applications. It was trained on historical hiring data, meaning it learned from decisions made by humans who had biases, right? Even well-intentioned ones. It learned that certain schools or certain neighborhoods or certain phrasings in the cover letters correlated with success at that company, right? And so it replicates those correlations efficiently at scale without malice and without mercy. The algorithm doesn't know it's being unfair. Fairness isn't a pattern in data, it's a value judgment, and making it requires understanding why a pattern exists, right? And deciding whether you want to continue it. This is the core limitation that no amount of computing power can fix. AI doesn't have what we might call contextual empathy, right? The capacity to understand that a data point represents a human life and that the statistically optimal response might be the morally wrong one. A sentencing algorithm might accurately predict reoffending rates based on historical data, but these historical rates reflect decades of unequal policing, unequal legal representation, and unequal economic opportunity. Optimizing for the pattern doesn't just reflect the inequity, it locks it in. The algorithm has no mechanism to ask, should this pattern exist at all? Only a human can do that. Only a human can look at data and understand its context and decide to break the pattern in the name of something that matters more than efficiency. Not because humans are smarter in every way. In many narrow tasks, the machine is faster by miles, of course, but because humans understand that optimization pointed in the wrong direction isn't progress, right? This is why human in the loop, mandatory human review at key decision points, isn't a sentimental indulgence. It's a structural necessity. It's the checkpoint that exists because systems that cannot question their own assumptions can't catch their own errors, right? We saw this with content moderation. AI, it couldn't distinguish between satire and hate speech, and with medical diagnostic tools that perform dramatically worse on patients underrepresented in the training data, and with predictive policing software that sent resources disproportionately to neighborhoods that were already over-policed. And in every case, the tool was doing exactly what it was built to do, and in every case, what it was built to do was not enough. Speed and scale are extraordinary capabilities, but speed and scale applied without judgment are just the capacity to make mistakes faster and at much greater volume. Humans are messy, inconsistent and slow and subject to bad days and personal blind spots and the occasional failure to sneeze convincingly on camera. But we're also the only things in this equation capable of deciding that rules shouldn't be followed because it's unjust, right? That a pattern should be broken because it's wrong, or that efficiency is not the only value that counts. AI is a tool of extraordinary power. Power, as various science fiction franchises have noted extensively, requires oversight. The human in the loop isn't a bottleneck. It's the part of it all that gives a damn, right? So to summarize what we've covered today, AI detection tools are confidently wrong in different directions simultaneously. AI language models will fabricate a Harvard study and format it in APA citations without missing a beat at all. We're outsourcing exactly the cognitive friction that makes us capable of independent thought. And algorithms, left to their own devices, will replicate injustice at speeds the original perpetrators could never have imagined. And yet none of this makes the technology the enemy, right? Fire burns things down and it also keeps you warm. Yeah. The question is always who's holding it and with, or actually what, judgment and toward what end, right? Like I said, not everybody is good. Verify things, meet people on camera, keep doing the hard thinking even when a chatbot offers to do it for you. And remember that polish doesn't mean true. Confidence does not mean correct. And anyone who tells you that they have many narrators, very professional, very much a real operation, ask them to introduce you. Verify the facts, meet people in person. If someone sounds too perfect, ask them to sneeze. This script was spoken and notes were written by a human, but I'm sure a detector somewhere thinks I'm a toaster.
Thanks for listening to Unbound with Beth Curry. Join the conversation in the Facebook group or visit author.bethcurry.com. Want to support the show? Head to ko-fi.com/unbound podcast. Until next time, stay unbound.